Okay, actually, the logins have kind of slowed down now, so I think maybe we'll get started. It's now 12:04, so I think that's fair enough. So, thank you for joining me today. My name is Dean McEwen. I'm the director of the Master of Management Analytics program at Smith in both the blended and the global sections. So today I thought I'd do something a little bit different than what we do a traditional webinar. So I'm actually not really going to talk about the program. I'm just going to talk about some of the topics that we do, and I'm going to move through this fairly quickly as an introduction to analytics and the topics that we cover in the program itself. And I would appreciate your feedback on this to see how valuable this is as we go forward. Not really a lecture; it's more of a discussion of what we will cover and the different types of analytics and the things that need to be taken into consideration even before you start with the analytics side of things. So we'll do this. There will be a recording made available to you afterwards, and you'll be sent an email with links to that. And then during the session, if you have a question, feel free to put up your hand. Hopefully I'll be able to see it coming up. If not, there's a chat function. And you can enter your questions into the chat. So I'll be watching that. And then always make sure there's time at the end of the end of the session here for questions as well. So, all right. So without further ado, let's get going. So this is an introduction to analytics. Okay. So what's going on? The world is changing, right? We've got mega change happening. I would argue, in the 90s and the 2000s and that kind of stuff, a lot of companies looked at cutting, right? They cut back. That was their solution to helping out the bottom line, was basically reduce. And all the organizations have reduced enough, right? There's nothing left to reduce. So these companies, at least the smart ones, the innovative ones, are realizing that we've got to do something different. We have to approach business very differently. We have to be fluid. We have to be able to move. And this has never been more important than the past 18 months as we face with the pandemic. And we've got to be able to, everyone's probably sick of this word pivot. We've got to be able to change. And so this world is changing. And so one of the big things that's happened, and this is why analytics is so important right now, and data, is that we've basically fallen back to very traditional ways, actually. The very basic, what I would call, the Western scientific method, where you have an intuition of what's going on. We've been based, successful organizations have been built on intuition and the ideas of individuals. And so we still want to maintain that. That intuition is extremely important. You need people who have an expertise in that particular business to be successful. But we want to start applying a bit of science to that intuition. But what we're seeing now is if you can start with your intuition and then you formulate an actual hypothesis. So remember back to, high school science and that kind of stuff, develop a hypothesis of what's going to happen if you do something. And so you can have a hypothesis, then you can identify the data that you want to use and you want to study and to analyze. And then off from that, right, that is where you're going to be developing important insights that can then affect your business's decision-making processes. And that's where the real strength of this comes into play. And why today? Today data is actually relatively cheap. Storage is cheaper, right? So you can grab, sorry, that would be my cat. Let me just figure this out. So what's happening now is you've got these organizations where the data is very easy to get a hold of. You can store it, right? So everyone can store all the data that they possibly want to store, and you can analyze the heck out of it. The key is there's a few important parts of that need to be discussed. Where do you store it? How do you store it? How long do you store it? That kind of stuff. And that data is really what we call this foundation for success, right? You're never going to be able to get what I would call here to the top of the pyramid without having verified and trusted data at the very bottom. That is the key. And so you have to be able to understand what kind of data you have. You have to be able to trust what that data is and what that data says. And that is the bottom line, has to be completed before any kind of analytics can happen, right? So that's really, really important. So we need, what do you need to start that? You need data governance to figure that out. Now, data sources today, again, data is coming from everywhere. We're getting data that is people generated. Social media is absolutely full. We understand how people are clicking their way through the internet and through social media. We've got email. Google is very good about analyzing emails and offering their free Gmail service, which is, nothing is free in this world. And of course, any kind of documents that are again published, through either OneDrive or Google Drive and that kind of stuff. All that kind of content can be captured and used. Sensors, we're developing new systems, using Bluetooth and Wi-Fi that can communicate with one another. We've got different cameras and visualizations, GPS systems, all that kind of stuff, closed circuit TV. All these different areas or sensors really are generating tons and tons of data as well. So we've got that to analyze. And then we've got organizational data. That's, any kind of purchase transaction you've done, understanding through census, the demographics of a community and organization. We've got the GPS and mobile sensors where people are actually, moving around, right? We've got, so-called free Wi-Fi in a shopping mall. Well, we can actually use that information when you bounce from Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi. We can sort of track your location and what stores do you like to visit. What's the first store you visit? What's the last store you visit? Things like that. And any kind of customer interactions, when you're talking about chatbots, most large organizations are using chatbots these days. Well, every time you're using a chatbot, you're entering more text and having conversations with people. And that information can, again, be analyzed for future uses. Now, analytics is, again, being used, almost extensively in business and government. We are using it to optimize our operations, whether it's through sales and pricing. We're managing those bottom lines much more effectively using data, and we're developing great efficiencies. And it's not just the hack and slash, efficiencies that we've seen before. It's actually very strategic efficiencies. What can we do? How can we source our supply chain? How can we price things accordingly? How can we make sure that the product's available when it's actually needed by our customers? And so that is really helping out very well. We've been using analytics, certainly in financial institutions and insurance companies, to identify risk. Understanding the telcos are really big on customer churn, right? Looking at, when is a person's contract, the 2-year contract in Canada, is going to be up. What's going to happen with those people? We can get some pretty good finite information about an individual's behavior through the data that we're seeing. And certainly fraud and defaulting on loans and things like that. We're going to be able, I'll look at that a little bit later on too. And one of the most impactful parts is about predictive modeling. And we can actually predict consumer behavior or organizational behavior through modeling and developing different algorithms to support us in that. A couple of the examples here about upselling and cross-selling, right? We know that if someone goes in to buy a TV, let's say, in a store, there's a good chance they're going to be interested in buying, HDMI cables, a mount for the wall, that kind of stuff. So it's very easy to cross-sell. If you can predict that and make certain offers to people, you can increase your sales. And complying with law is really a big one. So one of the great successes that we've seen literally around the world is anti-money laundering. So we can actually track how people are moving money and identifying sizes. The traditional way was any sort of transaction over $10,000 would had to be reported to the government. And so banks could sort of track that information. And naturally, some bad people or bad behavior, basically, if you did $9,000, then you wouldn't be flagged. So you could move around smaller amounts. But now, because it's all, a lot of it's digital and electronic transfers and things, we can look at trends at transferring and how much and how frequently and to whom. That information can be captured and analyzed in real time. And then anytime that there's a red flag pops up, it can be investigated literally immediately. And of course, the Sarbanes-Oxley stuff in the United States, that has actually helped with the accounting and the forensic accounting part. And again, looking for fraud. Now, digital strategies, there's been some really interesting reports. And so this one here is from McKinsey, and it's about digital strategy. And the interesting thing about digital right now is that it seems, right, instant and free, and it has this ability to connect people and devices. When you think about, the evolution of the smartphone, for example, and the impact that a smartphone has had on society and economies, I don't know that it was actually foreseen to be at that same level as the impact that it's actually had. And it has really changed a lot of things, including social media apps and stuff, about accessibility for people. And so these sorts of digital implications are actually tremendous. Here we go. By 2025, 20 billion devices will be connected. It's 3 times the world's population. So that means that for each person on the globe, there's at least 3 devices. And I know from me, I just look around my desk right now, and I actually have quite a few connected devices myself. So those devices are churning out immense amounts of data. And that data can be captured. And as I mentioned earlier, storage is cheap, right? So we can keep that data and we can mine it and analyze it to discover those trends and those ideas and things going forward. And that's going to take sort of a very innovative and entrepreneurship kind of a mindset to be able to do this successfully. And again, there's the bottom bullet here about high levels of automation, robotics and robotic process automation. There's a lot in there that can be unpacked. Elon Musk just talking about his humanoid robot that he wants to have. There's so many different ideas out there to develop those efficiencies and to understand the process, right? And be able to sort of visualize what's going on and to replicate that using robotics. So some very sort of mundane tasks can now be done over computer systems. I personally, and you've probably seen this on me, but I use Calendly to help book people's meetings. And I tell you, that has been an actual life changer for me. And I think also for students as well, because now you can actually get access to my calendar and my free time and be able to book a meeting with me almost any time. I know my calendar has been pretty full the past few weeks, but this has made a big change. Like traditionally, there would have been like phone calls and emails, and it would have gone back and forth to find that perfect time. But that kind of automation is really quite a bit of a game changer and stuff. And when you think about these changes and that innovation that can happen, you're going to be able to develop brand new business models going forward. And that's where, the real secret is, and the real idea of people and where do people's thought processes go and how these things can change to help your organization. Now, this is, again, a screenshot from a Boston Consulting report as well, which is extremely interesting about using data and being able to share data to develop value inside your organization. And it's true about, facilitating coordination. And this is one of the things that I always say about digital transformation. Digital transformation is just not about, digital in the organization, but digital transformation is really the breakdown of, and not really the breakdown, but the changing, the evolution of those traditional business pillars, right? So in traditional business, you have your marketing team, you have your finance team, you have your accounting team, you have supply, and you have operations. Again, traditionally, those pillars would have had their own data sets, their own computer systems. Shadow IT popped up as well, just to make it easier, because people didn't want to share data. They always hung onto their data as hard as they possible. They didn't want, the marketing people don't want the finance people to see their data and see their customer database, that kind of stuff. that way of thinking has got to change, right? And this is what I think digital transformation is all about. Digital transformation is understanding a problem for your organization as an organizational problem. And in order to solve that problem, you're going to need a cross-functional team. So it's not going to sit within finance anymore. They may take the lead, but it's not just going to be finance people. You're going to have a cross-functional team that's going to include the marketing people, the finance people, the accounting people, and the IT people. And they're going to have to understand what that business is, what the business's problem is, and then what kind of data they can analyze to solve those problems. And then they can have access to that data, and sharing that data is going to be extremely valuable. So if you think about, the sales team understanding the data from the marketing team, huge benefits there. And the same thing with the pricing team. That kind of information is just gold for anybody going forward and for assuring success. So access to that data is going to be extremely important. Now I'm going to get into, what is analytics and what do we talk about in this program. So we look at 4 different types of analytics in our MMA program. Each of these types of analytics is equally important. In fact, they each serve a very, very integral function within your organization. So if you want to start with, descriptive analytics, it seems to me the most basic. I would argue it's been around the longest, and it's sort of what happened. How many widgets did we produce this month? But of course, that's never enough. We're never happy with what we've done. We want to know what we're going to do. And that's where we get into predictive analytics and predictive modeling, that we kind of model it out and figure, okay, what's going to happen? So if we produced 100 widgets last month, we're going to predict we're going to produce 100 widgets next month, and then the month after that, and the month after that. And that's how you do your modeling. The problem with modeling, though, is it's always inherently wrong, right? There's going to be something going to creep up. You can think about, a disastrous weather, a pandemic, all that kind of stuff. And so that's going to mess up your models very, very quickly. I know pretty much every organization out there has had to redevelop their risk models because of COVID-19 and the impacts that it can have on people's, the financial impact, the ability to pay back loans, the insurance, all that kind of stuff. All those models have had to be rebuilt. So we want to get to that next level called prescriptive analytics. And that's really about, how do you make sure it's going to happen? How do you optimize your operations to ensure that those widgets can be produced and you're on track with whatever targets you have? So if your organization has been, producing 100 widgets each month, and it's time now that you think your customers are asking for more widgets and you want to change the pricing, then let's think about our manufacturing facilities. And we can start that today, change the output today, so that we kind of guarantee or make sure that we're going to have the outcome that we want in the future. And so we'll touch on that in this program as well, about prescriptive analytics, hugely important. And when you think about prescriptive analytics, you can think about things like dynamic pricing. One of the examples I quite often use for dynamic pricing is the airline industry. Once an airplane takes off, if there's any empty seats on that plane, that is lost revenue for the organization. So what you want to be able to do is analyze the data, your customer data, your flight data, the costs associated with that flight, the size of the plane, all that information, the timing of when people traditionally buy tickets. We can analyze that. We can analyze that data, and we know what's going on there. And so we can price the tickets accordingly to make sure that every single seat on that airplane is full before it takes off. So that's hugely important, because like I said, even if you sold that last seat for $1, that's more another $1 to your bottom line that you could have done. And then when you think about that example of airline tickets, you can't have a person sitting there, adjusting the price as tickets are either purchased or not purchased, and supply and demand fluctuates. So what you want to be able to get to is cognitive analytics. And cognitive analytics is really where you're developing a computerized system to make those decisions for you. And it's all about self-learning and automated artificial intelligence. And this is important because what you're talking about is a real-time analysis. You're going to be developing models. You're going to be analyzing systems in real time. And that system is then going to be able to make a decision on something like price in real time as well. So these systems are going to be making thousands, if not millions of decisions in a few seconds. And so it's really, really important that they're making the right decision, because you could be in a lot of trouble very, very quickly because our computer processing power is so fast now, and we've got the storage, we've got everything. We can build these systems now to make these decisions and to learn from the decisions and learn from the impact, right? So if you change the price on something, you can analyze the data shortly after that to see what impact. So if you drop a price 10%, what kind of uptake do you get? If you drop it 15%, what kind of an uptake do you? And then you'll learn from that system for the next time around. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting that's popped up lately is the CRISP DM, the cross-industry standard process for data mining. And this is something that we will look at in the program as well. It's extremely important. And it's good to understand because the important part here, again, is the business understanding. You have to understand the business, and then and only then can you understand what kind of data is accessible through that business. And then that data has to be prepped. Then you develop your models, you evaluate the success of that, and if it works well, that's great. You can go to deployment. If it doesn't work out so well, then you go right back to the business understanding and start the process again. So this is it's nice to have like an industry standard out there, and that's something that we certainly subscribe to here at Smith. And then I mentioned quickly about cognitive analytics and artificial intelligence. So we do have a course in machine learning. And so artificial intelligence, it's an interesting concept. It's very broad. It's interpreted very differently by different people. And so what we try to do here is we'll focus a little bit more on machine learning. We have a whole course on machine learning. But machine learning is where you're developing an application, right? Where machines, as I mentioned about the dynamic pricing, the machines use the data to automatically improve the decision-making and the insights to perform tasks. And the machine has to be taught, right? And so at this point in time, we sort of massage the data that goes into these, we develop the algorithms, and we understand the entire process. Hopefully, and we are working towards this, where the machines will learn from themselves, and that's where you call the machine learning part. Deep learning is also very important because it's relatively quick, certainly faster than machine learning. And it's basically, it's a different technique that, again, it analyzes data in a very similar way, but it uses multi-layered neural networks, and it behaves very much like the human brain. So we know that we can do this. We can test it. We can make sure that this works properly, and a neural network is great. But the big thing about neural networks and deep learning is that it's not very explainable, right? You can't really explain how the computer system came from point A to the result of point C. And so that becomes a bit of an issue for certain things. If you are doing data like visualization, and you're analyzing pictures and things like that, where, you know, an explanation really isn't that important, that's fine. Speed is of the essence. Speed, accuracy is great. So a neural network is the perfect tool for you. But if you're starting to do something like a credit assessment, you know, that's where it becomes problematic, because the banks and the regulators are going to want to know, how did you make that credit assessment for that particular customer? And that explainability is becoming more and more important as we develop more of these systems, and we're actually figuring out how to do this properly. So anytime there's some kind of a data or a bias or an ethical issue, the neural networks, although they're very fast and very efficient, they're probably not the best tool to use. So you have to go back to a machine learning where you have an actual decision tree that you can analyze and figure out the steps of what your algorithm has actually done. Okay, and now this is from a book, and I'm just going to, I don't want to mess up the thing, so I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, this is a book. It was written by Sam Borton, Joanne Lavoie, and Tiffany Vogel. It's called Will Artificial Intelligence Make You a Better Leader? And I found it very interesting because, they identify this. These are the only facts about analytics and AI that can be really proven. And they don't really prove much. So that's why I found it very interesting. When you're analyzing data, right, you'll never know ahead of time what the data will reveal. You develop a hypothesis based on your intuition, but you're never sure if it's actually going to come up with, a preferred solution on it. It may not, and in which case you have to be flexible enough to think about the changes that need to be done, whether it's a new product or a favorite color or pricing, whatever. You really don't know ahead of time what the data is going to reveal. The other nice thing about this is that by using analytics, it gives you an opportunity to really rethink what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. It says here, you're filtering the signal from the noise, and that's extremely important as well, because sometimes you might be off on a completely wrong track and your data is sort of supporting that, but also if you can find some insights in that data that take you down a different path, that can be very helpful for your organization. AI solutions can and should be tested. Definitely. An AI solution, anytime you program a computer system to make a decision for you, if it's not analyzed to make sure it's making the right decision, it could be devastating to your organization, and the risk could be through the roof at that point. So you got to test it and make sure that the right decisions are being made. And again, you have to have an open mind. You can be looking at data and you can be creative and you can think about different ideas, different products, different, whatever it is. You can be very objective. Like, you don't want to have the blinders on when you're analyzing data. You want to have an open mind. You want to be able to think outside that box and say, hey, what do we have here? Why is this trend? Why are these customers behaving in this particular way? And it might quite possibly be that you've just got the wrong product and it just needs to be adjusted or tweaked slightly. And, you'll get a brand new product with a brand new market share. So there's a lot of possibilities there, but you have to have sort of that creative juices flowing to be able to think a little bit differently than what you've been thinking before. Now, here's a couple of use cases. Now I'm already at the 12:31 mark, so maybe I'm not going to go through these too much, but this is one of the very first big successes of analytics. It was through UPS, and UPS, they install GPS systems in their vehicles when they're out for deliveries, and they're able to use that data to develop predictive modeling so that they can make sure that when a particular truck full of particular parcels maximizes the efficiency for the route for that driver. And one of the sidebar things was they discovered that every time a truck had to make a left-hand turn, it took up a lot of time, and it actually took up a lot of gas because you're doing some idling there in the intersection. And so part of their predictive model is actually to eliminate all the left-hand turns that they can in a route. So they can develop the route to deliver each and every parcel with as few left-hand turns as possible. And, they're able to save up to $50 million in 1 year just by doing that, by eliminating the left-hand turn. So it's really quite a success. And it's something that, people didn't go to say, hey, can we eliminate left-hand turns or right-hand turns, or we need to go straight? They didn't start the process that way. They discovered that through the data analysis, which is kind of fun. Fraud, very quickly, it's an $80 billion problem each year. And so the traditional techniques of having individuals look at the data and try to follow, those $10,000 transactions and stuff, it just wasn't efficient anymore. So we've been able to develop detection systems out there with machine learning models that analyze the data in real time and basically follow all those transactions that happen electronically. And there you can see a 50% decrease in false positives, 60% total savings from the costs, and a 15% increase in positive detection. So, that's 15% of $80 billion is pretty substantial. And then something most of us are probably familiar with as well is the Netflix recommender system. I like to use this as a case study because it's very effective, but not completely effective. And again, what Netflix doesn't do, it doesn't show you what's not there, right? So it will show you recommendations based on the shows you've been watching, but it doesn't necessarily know what you don't want to watch. And so now, lately, I've just noticed for the past couple of months, Netflix will have something that's just a watch anything or watch something now button, which will take you to a completely different area. And this is important to me. I was over at a friend's house and he put on like a music documentary, and I had no idea that it was on, Netflix. And so it makes you think, hey, just because, you're into, British murder shows or something like that, that's not the only types of shows on Netflix. And so you do have to, you as an individual have to reach out. But Netflix is still working on this recommender system to be able to think about their customers and think about something beyond their viewing history and the ratings and their viewing characteristics, but start thinking about other things about an individual and the demographics around that, and what might someone else at my particular age group would be interested in watching. And so, it's very interesting, and they're a great company because they've really embraced the whole idea of machine learning and these recommender systems, and it's worked out really well for them. One thing I would recommend you do too with Netflix is even the actual picture that gets shown to each individual person watching Netflix is different. And so the pictures of each of those shows will reflect the individual's viewing history. So if you're there with, your kids or your parents or somebody else, some friends, and you're looking at a picture of a particular movie or TV show and it looks different than what you get, it probably is. They have a whole selection of pictures that reflect your viewing history. Okay, and this is the bottom line with all of analytics. It's very important. It's actually about people, right? It's the analytics and the data, those are tools in the toolbox. But we know that it's the people that have to be creative. They have to be knowledgeable on how to do these things and how to learn these things, and have to introduce innovation and entrepreneurship. We've seen, I talked about 3 different examples about where true value can be derived through analytics and the proper training of AI algorithms. But that's not enough, right? It's not just the analytics and it's not just the AI. It's way beyond that. So you need people who have an effective and innovative culture, right? We need the people and the leaders who have the vision, who can develop a strategy from that vision, who have the leadership skills and the ability to be able to effectively change the organization and change management and digital transformation. And the bottom line is about collaboration. We need to be able to bring those cross-functional teams to bear, to look at those problems that we have in a business and to affect, positive change in the organization. And that's where, analytics and AI is really going to shine. So what I would argue, what you, and if you want to be managers and leaders in your organization, what you need to know, everybody needs to understand data analytics and AI. Even if you're not thinking that you're going to be implementing it or doing it or programming that kind of stuff, we need to encourage people to understand what this stuff is. And then we have to think about our business and how we can use analytics and AI to help our particular business. How do I organize my business around data analytics and AI? Because it does make you think a little bit differently. And it's definitely a different setup than we've had over the past, 20, 30 years. And more importantly, we have to look at the competitive landscape. What are other organizations doing, right? You think about some of the major corporations that have failed over the past 10, 15 years because they weren't looking at the competitive landscape. I talked about earlier a bit about smartphones and the impact smartphones have had. Well, think about, the traditional camera industries, everything from, your photocopiers, your printers, anything digital like that and imaging. The smartphone has had huge impact on that. There was a very long time, which many of you are probably not old enough to remember, but you couldn't ever print from a smartphone. So something like that, you had to have a computer, you had to have that computer hooked up to a printer, and that was the only way you could print a picture. Whereas now we can do it over the cloud, and cloud sharing and all that kind of stuff. The technology is moving so quickly. It's really fascinating to see what's happening. So it's really important that you at least understand this. And so I would give you, two pieces of advice as you sort of go forward and think about this analytics journey and artificial intelligence. But your goal is always to create value for yourself, your customers, and I think society as a whole. I think this is also becoming very important. It's not just me anymore. It really is, we have to look at the bigger picture and how do you fit into helping out society. So you got to create value there. And you win by doing more, not by doing the same thing cheaper. And that is the bottom line, I think, for digital transformation of organizations. You can't just cut anymore. You got to do things, but you got to do things smarter. And you have to be able to think about, the strategic development of that, but also the change management that's going to be required for doing things smarter. People's jobs are definitely going to be changing. You need to have the leadership, and you need training, and you need people to be successful at that. Okay, so this is what I would argue our main takeaways from this session is that there's 4 types of analytics. Each type has a very important use, so it's not like one's better than the other. But for an organization, I think if you're starting out, focus on the descriptive analytics, get that reporting done and accurate, make sure you're gathering the right kind of data. And then you can sort of build on that and think about the other ones. Artificial intelligence is here. It's evolving very, very quickly. And so it's important that you understand what it is and how it can impact your organization. You need to be careful and plan ahead, right? You can't just rush into AI. Because you can make a lot of mistakes in a very short period of time. So you need to be very careful, plan ahead, but you got to start that plan. You can't sit there and think, oh, I'm going to get to that next month. That's not the way the world is going to work. They're going to zip by you pretty quickly. And don't be scared. AI I wouldn't say it's simple, but it's something you can definitely study, and you can learn about AI. And certainly taking programs like ours, you can sort of develop an idea of AI and where it can go for you. Okay, and that's the end of my my session. I'm a little bit longer than I had thought I would be. But anyway, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or I think you can raise a hand, and I can answer that. But in the meantime, there's my contact information as well. My LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and send me an email. That's fine too. And if you are interested in learning a bit more about the specific programs that we offer at Smith, you can hit our webpage there, the smith.queensu.ca under grad studies and MMA, and you can get some more information. You can actually even start your application there if you want. There's we just launched the new blended program literally this week, and so there's been quite a bit of interest in that, and that program is going to be starting in January. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in. Okay, well, if there's no questions, then that's great. Hopefully I was able to inspire you a little bit to learn a little bit more about analytics and AI. And oh, wait a minute. There we go. I actually got some questions. There we go. So would you say that prescriptive and cognitive analytics refer to the tools to reduce the deviations in our predictive models due to extraneous circumstances such as disasters or pandemic? Yeah, so this is when you get into something like prescriptive and cognitive analytics. So cognitive analytics is really going to be about the speed and the effectiveness of making decisions on the fly, right? You can analyze the data right then and there, and you can develop a system that's going to make a decision. On the prescriptive side of things, prescriptive analytics is really about, again, about identifying the trends and the insights that's going on. So it's not necessarily about developing a computer system that's going to make decisions for you, but it's more about informing the business that they can then make some decisions from that. So, i.e., if I'll go back to my airline industry example. So for instance, if you see a spike in demand for a particular flight, let's say from Toronto to Amsterdam, if you see a particular spike on that, then your optimization decision could be a bigger plane, right? Or it could be more flights to meet that extra demand. So those are the kind of things. It's not necessarily a computerized system that's going to make that decision for you, but it is definitely an operational system that you can do. So like I said, added more seats by having a bigger plane, or adding more flights. So you, again, that's where intuition comes into play, and the people, again, are making important decisions for you. Okay. And Willem, you've got, has the blended MMA been approved? So last information set, yeah, so it has been approved. It's up and running. We officially launched it, the website and all that kind of stuff this week, but we were informing people about it up to 2 weeks ago. So it has been approved and it is all ready to go. I know you and I were supposed to meet earlier today to talk about that. It's too bad we didn't get that chance, but certainly it has been approved and we are accepting. Oh, I've already got, I think, about 7 people enrolled in that program already. So the blended MMA is turning out to be quite interesting to a lot of people. And so we've got that opportunity there as well. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. So we'll draw this to a close then. Again, thank you very much for joining me today. If you have any questions, you've got my contact information there. I definitely encourage you, if you're interested in the blended program, like I said, there seems to be quite a bit of interest in that. So I would recommend starting your application as quickly as possible. And one of the things I said I wasn't going to really talk about the program, but I can talk about the application process. It's really important to, once you start your application, there's no fee to apply. So really, it's just a bit of time to start your application. But that gives us a chance to assign you one of our application advisors. And those application advisors will work with you to make sure that your application is as strong as possible. We can work through an application in about 2 to 3 weeks, from the start to, an offer and enrollment. But there are a couple of sort of points in there that can take a little bit longer. So that's why it's always important to start your application early. So one of them is your references. We'll send out links to an online form for the references to fill out. And sometimes they can drag their heels a little bit. It becomes not a priority for some people. So that could take a little bit of time. The other thing is your original transcripts. We can usually look at your application with an unofficial transcript, but ultimately we will need an official transcript. So if you, if it's difficult to get that, it's important that you start that process right away as well. And then, as you go through where there's an interview, we can do that very quickly. And then our admissions committee, again, we're meeting virtually these days, so it can be done very quickly. We used to meet once a month. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We can look through admission decisions very, very quickly. So it's a huge change for us over the past 18 months to be able to do that. Okay, so thank you very much again for joining me today. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I hope to see you in the class. Thank you.